Hello. There's a moment when your gut tells you something isn't right, but your heart refuses to listen. Mine came on the morning of our 8th wedding anniversary. Claire had been acting strange for weeks, but I chalked it up to stress from her new project at work. She'd insisted we celebrate by going out for a special dinner, just the two of us. I remember being excited as I pulled into the driveway that evening, holding a gift box with the pearl bracelet Claire had admired months ago at the mall. The kind of gift that would make her light up with that smile that reminded me why I fell for her in the first place. The house was quiet when I walked in, which was strange considering Claire always had music playing while she got ready. The kids were at my parents' for the night, so I figured she was upstairs. I called out, "Claire, you ready to head out?" No answer. Curious, I set the gift down on the kitchen counter and made my way toward the stairs. That's when I noticed it. A faint hum of voices coming from the backyard. I stepped closer to the sliding glass door, and my heart skipped. Candles were lit around the patio table, and 2 wine glasses sat side by side. At first, I smiled, thinking Claire had planned a surprise. But then I saw him. A man I didn't recognize sat across from her, leaning forward, his hand resting on hers. They were laughing, their heads close together, oblivious to everything else. Claire's face was glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. I stood there frozen, my hand gripping the doorframe, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't the laughter or the closeness that got me. It was her eyes. The way she looked at him, like he was the only person in the world. I could feel my chest tighten, the air around me growing heavy. Part of me wanted to burst out there and demand an explanation, but I couldn't move. Not yet. I stepped back into the shadows, watching as they clinked their glasses and shared an inside joke I wasn't a part of. I didn't need to hear the words to understand what was happening. My world had just cracked wide open. I stood in the dark kitchen, my mind spinning as I tried to figure out what to do. I had seen enough, but something in me refused to move just yet. I leaned against the counter, the gift box still sitting there, untouched, and stared blankly at the wine bottle on the counter. Claire had been so specific about this night, telling me she wanted it to be special. Now I understood why, and it had nothing to do with me. After what felt like hours but was probably no more than a few minutes, I walked back to the glass door. They were still there, still talking and laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. My heart pounded, my chest felt tight, and every fiber of my being told me to walk out there and end whatever this was. But something held me back. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I felt sick to my stomach as I opened the camera and hit record. My hands shook as I zoomed in on their faces, on the way he reached out to brush her hair back. She didn't pull away. She didn't hesitate. I turned off the recording after a few seconds, saving it in case I needed it later. I didn't even know what I was thinking. I just needed to have proof of this moment. Then, with as much calm as I could muster, I slid the glass door open and stepped outside. The sound of the door startled them. Claire whipped her head around, and for a moment, her expression froze. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her hand still resting in his. The man leaned back slightly, his hand retreating, but he didn't say anything. "Am I interrupting something?" I asked. My voice was steady, but inside, I was anything but. Claire stood up quickly, smoothing her dress as if that would somehow erase what I had just seen. "Brian, you're home early," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Early?" I glanced at my watch. "It's 7:30. We were supposed to leave for dinner, remember?" She opened her mouth, probably to offer some excuse, but I wasn't in the mood to hear it. My eyes flicked to the man sitting at the table. He was tall, fit, and probably a few years younger than me. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, his sleeves rolled up, and he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "And you are?" I asked, turning my attention fully to him. "Matt," he said, standing up and extending a hand like this was some kind of business meeting. "I'm a friend of Claire's." I stared at his hand but didn't take it. Instead, I looked back at Claire. "A friend?" Claire looked panicked, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Brian, this isn't what it looks like," she said quickly. I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because it looks like you've been having a cozy little evening with a friend while I've been sitting inside, waiting for the anniversary dinner you insisted we have. It's not like that, she said, shaking her head. We were just talking. Just talking. I let out a short, humorless laugh. That's funny, because I could have sworn I saw him holding your hand. Is that how you usually talk to your friends? She started to say something, but Matt interrupted. Look, I think I should go. Good idea, I said sharply. He nodded and stepped around the table, avoiding my gaze as he headed for the side gate. I waited until he was out of sight before turning back to Claire. She looked down at the ground, refusing to meet my eyes. Inside. Now, I said. She hesitated, then nodded and walked past me into the house. I followed, sliding the door shut behind us. The kitchen felt colder than it had before, the air thick with tension. Claire stood near the counter, her arms crossed defensively. Start talking, I said, crossing my arms as well. It's not what you think, she said again. Then why don't you tell me what it is? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back. I haven't been sneaking around, she said quickly. Matt is just someone I know from work. He's been going through a hard time, and I was just trying to be there for him. And holding his hand? Laughing like you were on a date? That's just being there for him? She looked frustrated, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. It's not like that, she repeated. I swear, Brian, I didn't mean for you to see that. I frowned. You didn't mean for me to see it? That's your defense? Not that it didn't happen, but that you didn't want me to know. She looked away, her cheeks flushed. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said, my voice hard. Because you did. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like a canyon, too wide to cross. I could feel my anger simmering just beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. Are you seeing him? I asked finally. No, she said quickly. I told you, it's not like that. Then what is it like? She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she was searching for an escape. We've been talking a lot lately, she admitted. He's been having problems with his wife, and I've been trying to help him. Help him, I repeated. By having candlelit conversations in our backyard while I'm inside? I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice breaking. It got out of hand. But I swear, nothing physical has happened. I stared at her, trying to read her face. I wanted to believe her, but everything about this felt wrong. Do you have feelings for him? Her silence was answer enough. My chest felt like it was caving in. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I tried to process what she had just admitted. I had expected denials, excuses, maybe even anger. But not this. I need you to tell me the truth, I said after a moment. All of it. Right now. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay, she said quietly. But you're not going to like it. Claire's face tightened, and she stepped further away from me, like the space between us would soften what she was about to say. I stood there, waiting, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, not out of anger, but to keep myself steady. Matt and I started talking a few months ago, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. It was just casual at first, work stuff, things about his personal life. He's been going through a separation, and I felt bad for him. I didn't say anything, just kept my eyes locked on her. She cleared her throat and continued. Over time, it got more personal. He started opening up to me about his problems, his feelings. He told me how lonely he's been, and I guess I tried to help. You guess? I shot back. You're not sure if you were helping or encouraging something else? Claire flinched, like the words hit harder than she expected. It wasn't like that, she said quickly. I didn't mean for it to cross any lines. Did it? I asked. Her pause was longer this time. Her eyes darted to the floor, and her hands fidgeted with the edge of her blouse. Not physically, she said finally, but emotionally. I don't know. That hit harder than any confession about physical cheating could have. At least that would have been something concrete, something I could confront head-on. Emotional cheating was murkier, harder to define, and harder to forgive. What does that even mean? I asked, my voice sharp. You don't know? Either you were emotionally involved with him, or you weren't. She took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging like she was carrying the weight of the world. I care about him, Brian, she admitted, but I didn't realize how much until tonight. The words knocked the wind out of me. I staggered back a step, my hand gripping the counter for support. You didn't realize? So what? You needed me to catch you out there to figure it out. I didn't want to hurt you, she said again, her voice pleading now. Stop saying that. I snapped. You didn't want to hurt me, but you were out there holding his hand, laughing with him like I don't exist. Do you even hear yourself? She looked like she wanted to cry, but I wasn't ready to feel sorry for her. Not yet. Does he know how you feel? I asked, my voice quieter but no less sharp. Claire hesitated. We've never talked about it, she said. But maybe. Maybe, I repeated. So he knows you're married. He knows about me. And he's still okay sitting out there with you, acting like this is normal. He's been struggling, she said weakly, like that somehow justified any of this. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. And you thought you'd solve his problems by, what? Giving him your attention, your time, your... I stopped myself before saying something I couldn't take back. It's not like that, she said again, though it was clear even she didn't believe it anymore. I stared at her, trying to see the woman I married in the person standing in front of me. But she looked like a stranger. The way she held herself, the way she avoided my eyes. It wasn't the Claire I knew. Do you love him? I asked finally. Her head snapped up, and she looked at me like I just slapped her. What? You heard me, I said. Do you love him? She shook her head quickly, almost too quickly. No, she said. I love you. Do you? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Because it doesn't feel like it. Not tonight. Not for the past few months, if I'm honest. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might fall apart right there. But she held it together, just barely. I do love you, Brian, she said, her voice trembling. I know I've made mistakes, but that doesn't change how I feel about you. It changes everything, I said, my tone cold. You don't get to say you love me and then do this. Love doesn't work like that. She didn't say anything, just stared at me with tears in her eyes. I turned away, needing a moment to think. My head was spinning, and my chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I had trusted her completely, and now it felt like the foundation of my entire life was crumbling beneath me. I don't even know what to say to you right now, I said finally, my voice low. I don't know how to fix this, Claire. I don't even know if it can be fixed. I'll do whatever it takes, she said quickly, stepping toward me. I'll cut him off. I'll quit my job if I have to. Just tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Her desperation might have moved me once, but now it just felt hollow. I don't think it's that simple, I said. You don't just stumble into something like this. You made choices, Claire. Choices that hurt me, whether you meant to or not. And now you want me to tell you how to make it better? I don't even know if I can. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Just give me a chance to make it right. I looked at her for a long time, trying to figure out if I could believe her, if I could trust her again. I need time, I said finally. I need to think about what this means for us. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need, she said. But as I walked out of the room, her words didn't feel like a promise. They felt like an ending. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, staring at the blank television screen as Claire cried herself to sleep in the bedroom. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was fleeting. What settled in its place was something colder, something sharper. Anger makes you yell. It makes you throw things. But this was calculation. She thought a few tears and promises would fix this. She thought cutting off Matt would be enough to make me forget the humiliation I felt watching her act like I didn't exist. But she was wrong. This wasn't going to end with her wiping her eyes and us moving on. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. James. He was an old friend, someone I'd gone to college with. Back then, he was the guy who always had a plan, who always knew how to get even without breaking the rules. We hadn't talked much in recent years, but I knew he still had his connections. It was late, but I didn't care. I sent him a message, need a favor. Call me when you can. The call came 20 minutes later. Brian? What's going on, man? James's voice was groggy but alert. I need your help, I said, getting straight to the point.
With what?
Digging into someone. Claire's coworker, Matt. There was a pause on the other end. Coworker? You mean? Yeah, I said. I caught them tonight. I need to know everything about him. Who he is, what he does, who he's married to. I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, what skeletons he's hiding in his closet. James let out a low whistle. That's serious. You sure about this? Absolutely, I said. All right, he said. Give me a couple of days. I'll get back to you. The next morning, I acted like nothing was wrong. Claire tried to talk to me over breakfast, but I gave her short, polite answers and nothing more. If she noticed the change in my demeanor, she didn't say anything. She seemed to think that giving me space would fix everything. By the time James called me back 2 days later, I had my game plan. He didn't disappoint. Matt wasn't the squeaky clean guy Claire thought he was. He was separated, sure, but it wasn't because his wife had left him. It was because he'd been caught cheating, with 2 other women, no less. His soon-to-be ex-wife was fighting for full custody of their kids and had already subpoenaed his work emails as evidence of his infidelity. It was perfect. That evening, I told Claire I needed to run some errands. She didn't question me. I drove straight to Matt's house, a modest townhouse about 15 minutes from ours. His car was parked out front. I knocked on the door, and he answered after a few moments, looking confused. Brian, right? He said, his brow furrowed. Claire's husband? That's me, I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He closed the door behind me, still looking puzzled. What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said. Look, if this is about Claire. It is, I interrupted, but not in the way you think. He crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. All right, I'm listening. I know about you, I said, keeping my voice calm. I know about the affairs, the emails, the custody battle. I know about everything. His face paled slightly, but he didn't say anything. You might think Claire's worth risking your career over, but let me tell you something. She's not, I continued. You're already in enough trouble as it is. Do you really want me to make things worse? He frowned, straightening up. Are you threatening me? Not at all, I said. I'm giving you a way out. You stop talking to Claire. No texts, no calls, no meetings. Nothing. You disappear from her life completely. If I so much as hear your name come up in conversation, I'll make sure your wife's lawyer gets everything they need to bury you in court. He stared at me, his jaw tightening. You can't do that. Can't I? I asked. I have screenshots of your public social media interactions with Claire, timestamps that match her work calendar. And if I dig deeper, I'm sure I'll find plenty more. Do you really want to take that chance? He didn't answer, but the way his shoulders slumped told me I'd won. You're going to walk away, I said firmly. You're going to leave Claire alone, and you're going to stay out of my life. Do we understand each other? He nodded reluctantly. Good, I said, turning to leave. Have a nice evening. When I got home, Claire was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in. Hey, she said cautiously. Where were you? Just running errands, I said, my tone neutral. She didn't press further, but I could see the unease in her eyes. Over the next week, I watched as Matt pulled away from her. She tried to call him a few times, but he didn't pick up. When she asked me if I knew anything about it, I just shrugged and said maybe he'd realized it was inappropriate to get so close to a married woman. By the end of the week, she was quieter, more subdued. I could see the guilt eating away at her, but I didn't offer her any comfort. She'd made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I wasn't done, though. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. Not just to me, but to us, to our family. I started keeping a record of everything. The nights she came home late, the texts she tried to hide, the excuses she made. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. And as I sat in the living room that night, watching her pretend like everything was normal, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was ready. A week after my confrontation with Matt, I started putting my full plan into motion. Claire had spent most of that week acting strange, quiet at times, overly attentive at others. It was as if she was trying to gauge where I stood without directly asking. I gave her nothing. Every interaction was measured, polite, and distant. She thought she could fix this by pretending it didn't happen, but I was making sure she would feel the full weight of her choices. I spent that week compiling everything I had: bank statements, phone records, and even a timeline of events pieced together from things she'd mentioned offhand. I reviewed every detail, down to the canceled anniversary dinner I had planned to the candlelit evening she had spent with Matt instead. By Friday, I had everything I needed. Claire was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in, holding a manila envelope in my hand. "Can we talk?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. She looked up from the stove, surprised. "Of course," she said. "What's on your mind?" "Let's sit down," I said, gesturing to the kitchen table. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she nodded and followed me. I set the envelope on the table between us and sat down across from her. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the envelope warily. "Everything," I said. She didn't move to open it, so I continued. "I've spent the last week documenting everything. Your meetings with Matt, your late nights, your lies. I've got copies of texts, call logs, and a detailed timeline. If I wanted to, I could take this to a lawyer tomorrow." Her face went pale. "Brian, Don't," I said sharply. "You don't get to talk right now. I gave you a chance to explain yourself, and you told me it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, was it? It was a choice, a series of choices that you made without any regard for me or our family." She stared at me, her hands trembling slightly. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything," I said. "I want you to listen." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "For the past 8 years, I've done everything I could to be a good husband. I've worked hard to provide for us, to make sure you and the kids have everything you need. I've been faithful, supportive, and patient. And this is how you repay me?" "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice shaking. "Then what was it like?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you decided I wasn't enough and went looking for validation somewhere else." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I made a mistake," she said. "I know that, and I'm sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me." I shook my head. "That's not good enough, Claire. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you betrayed me. It doesn't change the fact that you put our marriage at risk for some guy who doesn't even care about you." She looked down at the table, her tears falling onto the wood. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "I want you to move out," I said. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "I've already packed a bag for you. You can stay at your parents' house or get a hotel. I don't care. But I need you out of here by the end of the day." Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. "This isn't a separation," I continued. "It's not a trial period or a break. It's the beginning of the end. I'm filing for divorce on Monday." "No," she said, her voice breaking. "Brian, please. Don't do this." "I have to," I said. "You made your choice, Claire. Now I'm making mine." She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to take mine. I pulled back before she could touch me. "Don't," I said coldly. "You don't get to play the victim here. You don't get to cry and beg and act like this is something that just happened to you. You did this. You." She broke down completely then, her sobs echoing through the kitchen. I stood up and walked to the doorway, pausing to look back at her one last time. "Pack your things," I said, "and leave the key on the counter when you go." I didn't wait for her response. I walked out of the kitchen and upstairs to my office, closing the door behind me. I could still hear her crying downstairs, but I forced myself to block it out. For the next few hours, I stayed in the office, going over the final details of my plan. I had already called a lawyer and started the paperwork for the divorce. I had made arrangements for the kids to stay with my parents for a few weeks while Claire and I sorted everything out. And I had spoken to my employer about taking some time off to focus on my family. By the time I came back downstairs, Claire was gone. Her key was sitting on the counter next to the envelope I had left for her. I picked it up and flipped through the pages, making sure everything was still there. It was. I put the envelope back on the counter and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace. Not because things were resolved, they weren't, not by a long shot, but because I finally felt like I had taken back control of my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, it would be on my terms. The house was quiet after Claire left, almost unnervingly so. It wasn't just the absence of her presence. It was the weight of everything that had happened settling in. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the blank wall across from me. A part of me wanted to feel relief, like I'd finally reclaimed my life. But all I felt was an emptiness that I couldn't shake. The next morning, I woke early. I made coffee, skipped breakfast, and went through the checklist I had prepared the night before. The lawyer's office was my first stop. I arrived as soon as their doors opened, my manila envelope tucked under my arm. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, but I could tell by the look in her eyes that she'd seen this scene play out 100 times before. "Mr. Johnson will see you shortly," she said, gesturing to a row of chairs by the window. I nodded and sat down, flipping through my papers one more time. When my name was called, I followed the lawyer into his office, a no-nonsense kind of guy in his mid-50s. His handshake was firm, his tone brisk. "Brian, good to meet you," he said. "Let's get started." I laid everything out for him. The records, the timeline, the photos, the text logs. He took his time reviewing it all, nodding occasionally and making notes on a legal pad. "This is thorough," he said finally. "You've done a lot of the groundwork already." "I wanted to be prepared," I said. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the pad. "If your goal is to make this as straightforward as possible, we can proceed with a no-fault filing. However, if you want to build a case for marital misconduct, you've got a strong foundation here." "I don't want a drawn-out fight," I said. "I just want it over." "Understood," he said. "I'll draft the petition and have it ready for filing by the end of the week. Once it's filed, Claire will be served, and we'll go from there." The word "served" felt strange, like it didn't belong in a conversation about the woman I'd spent nearly a decade of my life with. But I nodded, signed the necessary documents, and left the office feeling lighter, if not better. Over the next few days, I focused on moving forward. I called my parents and explained the situation, careful to keep my tone neutral. They were supportive, as I knew they would be, but I could hear the disappointment in their voices, not in me, but in the situation as a whole. They loved Claire, or at least the version of her they thought they knew. The kids were harder. Ethan and Lily didn't know the details, and I wasn't planning to tell them anytime soon. I framed it as, Mommy and Daddy need some time apart to work through a few things, which seemed to satisfy them for now. They were young enough to accept it without too many questions, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. By the time Claire was served with the divorce papers, I had already started making changes. I met with a financial advisor to separate our accounts, transferred the utilities into my name, and set up a temporary custody arrangement through my lawyer. Everything was clinical, procedural, and efficient, the exact opposite of how I felt inside. When Claire called me after being served, I almost didn't answer. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally swiping to accept. "Brian," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I got the papers." "I know," I said. There was a pause, and I could hear her struggling to keep her composure. "Is this really what you want?" "It's not about what I want," I said. "It's about what needs to happen." "Can't we talk about this?" she asked. "Just once, face to face?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep her at arm's length and let the legal process play out. But another part of me knew that if I didn't give her this, she'd find another way to drag it out. "Fine," I said. "Tomorrow, 3 p.m., at the house. Be there or don't. It's up to you." The next day, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Claire arrived 10 minutes late, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore the same clothes I'd seen her in earlier that week when she picked up the kids. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, sitting down across from me. "I'm listening," I said. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I don't know how to fix this," she began, "but I want to try. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, whatever you want." Just tell me how to make it right. You can't, I said simply. Her eyes filled with tears. Brian, please. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. I leaned forward, my expression hard. You already did, Claire. The moment you chose to build a connection with someone else instead of talking to me, you lost us. This isn't something you can undo with an apology and a few therapy sessions. But I love you, she said, her voice breaking. I shook my head. If you loved me, this wouldn't have happened. Love isn't just a feeling, Claire. It's a choice. And you chose him. She broke down completely, her shoulders shaking as she cried. I watched her, feeling a strange mix of sadness and detachment. A part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay. But that part was smaller now, overshadowed by the reality of what she had done. When she finally looked up at me, her face was pale and tear-streaked. Is there really nothing I can do? No, I said firmly. This is the end. She nodded slowly, her tears falling silently now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Take care of yourself, Claire. She nodded again, standing up and walking to the door. She paused for a moment, looking back at me as if hoping for some sign of forgiveness. I gave her none. When the door closed behind her, I let out a long breath and sat back down at the table. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine again. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Bye-bye.